For centuries, long before marine biologists lowered hydrophones into the water, or satellite tags traced migratory routes across entire oceans, the animal we now call the orca existed mostly as a rumour carried by sailors. It appeared first not in scientific journals but in logbooks and dockside stories, described as a black shape cutting through grey seas, moving with purpose, sometimes in groups, sometimes in silence. The earliest European accounts did not linger on curiosity, they lingered on violence. The name killer whale did not begin as an exaggeration, it began as a translation. Spanish sailors in the 18th century referred to the animal as Assassina balenus, whale killer. The phrasing reflected what they believed they were witnessing: coordinated attacks on much larger baleen whales. Over time, as words drifted between languages and cultures, whale killer inverted into killer whale. The subtle grammatical shift changed the emphasis. The original term described behaviour, the new one described identity. It is a small linguistic twist, but it mattered. Once an animal is named for killing, every observation that follows begins from that premise. Early whalers in the North Pacific and North Atlantic recorded encounters with pods of orcas harassing, exhausting, and sometimes bringing down much larger whales. There are 19th century accounts of orcas targeting the lips and tongues of grey whales, documented with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. Some whalers even noted that the presence of orcas could signal opportunity. A distressed whale might be easier for humans to finish. The relationship was strange, almost parasitic. Humans and orcas hunting the same prey, sometimes indirectly benefiting from each other's violence. But those early observations were incomplete. Whalers were not neutral observers. They were industrial hunters engaged in one of the most destructive extraction industries the oceans have ever seen. Their accounts were shaped by what they feared and what they valued. When they saw orcas attacking whales, they did not see ecological regulation or social hunting strategy. They saw competition. Competition breeds hostility, and hostility shapes narrative. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, maritime folklore had hardened the orca into a villain. Stories circulated of devil fish shadowing ships, of black fins appearing in rough seas as omens. There are surprisingly few documented incidents of aggression toward humans from that period, but absence of evidence rarely dampens a good story. The ocean was already a place of myth and dread. The orca fit easily into that psychological landscape. Even natural history illustrations contributed to the image. Early engravings often exaggerated the teeth, the eye, the curvature of the dorsal fin. The orca was rendered with an expression bordering on malicious. Scientific understanding lagged behind artistic imagination. It was not until the mid-20th century that sustained scientific study of orcas began in earnest. Before that, most knowledge came from dead specimens, animals caught incidentally in whaling operations or deliberately killed for museum collections. Observing an orca in its natural environment for extended periods was logistically difficult and rarely attempted. As a result, the narrative of ferocity went largely unchallenged. Then came captivity. In 1964, the first successful live capture of an orca for public display took place in British Columbia. The animal, later named Moby Doll, survived only a few months, but during that time something unexpected happened. People were able to look at an orca closely, not through the lens of distance or fear, but face to face across glass. Trainers described curiosity rather than aggression, intelligence rather than blind rage. Captivity is ethically complex and in many ways deeply troubling, but historically it played a pivotal role in reshaping public perception. When audiences watched orcas respond to cues, recognize trainers, and perform complex behaviors, the idea of a mindless killer began to erode. The same animal once described as a maritime demon was now swimming in choreographed arcs beneath stadium lights. Media, however, did not surrender its earlier framing easily. Films and television reinforced the predator image, especially as underwater cinematography improved. Slow-motion footage of orcas breaching, jaws open, became visual shorthand for oceanic danger. The term killer whale was too powerful, too marketable to abandon. And yet, as scientific observation expanded, a contradiction emerged. Field researchers in the Pacific Northwest, beginning in the 1970s, started documenting resident orca populations with unprecedented detail. Individuals were identified by the unique notches and shapes of their dorsal fins and saddle patches. Family trees were mapped. Social bonds were recorded year after year. What became clear was not chaos but structure. These animals were not roaming at random. They were living in stable matrilineal groups, sometimes spanning 3 or 4 generations. Calves stayed with their mothers for life. Males did not disperse. Social units were not temporary alliances. They were enduring family lines. The more closely researchers looked, the less the caricature held. Perhaps the most striking statistical fact, one that continues to unsettle expectations, is this. There are no confirmed fatal attacks on humans by wild orcas. Not one. In captivity, there have been tragic incidents, but in the open ocean, across centuries of interaction, wild orcas have not killed a human being. This absence is not due to incapacity. An adult male orca can reach over 8 meters in length and weigh more than 5 tons. Its bite force is formidable. It hunts marine mammals far larger than any human swimmer. The restraint is not physical limitation, it is behavioral choice. And yet, the name persists. Why does naming matter so much? Because language frames interpretation. When we hear killer whale, we do not imagine dialects, grandmothers, or cultural inheritance. We imagine teeth. Scientific naming attempts neutrality. The species is Orcanus orca. The genus name, Orcanus, derives from Orcus, a Roman god of the underworld. Even taxonomy could not entirely escape drama. But scientific study gradually shifted the emphasis from myth to measurement. Modern research reveals a predator, yes, but one embedded in a complex social and ecological web. Orcas are apex predators in many marine systems, occupying the top of the food chain. That role carries weight. It shapes ecosystems. It can appear ruthless. But apex status is not synonymous with indiscriminate violence. It often correlates with stability. Consider the early whalers again. When they saw orcas attacking baleen whales, they interpreted it as savagery. What they did not understand was that orca populations are highly specialized. Some groups target marine mammals, others feed almost exclusively on fish, still others hunt sharks. These dietary preferences are not flexible whims, they are culturally transmitted traditions. The killer whale of one region may be a salmon specialist in another, never touching a seal or whale. But the name collapses all variation into a single identity. Media narratives reinforced simplification. In the late 20th century, documentaries often emphasized the most dramatic footage: coordinated hunts, breaching attacks, blood in the water. These scenes are undeniably compelling, but they represent a fraction of orca behavior. Long stretches of social interaction, vocal communication, and slow travel rarely make the highlight reel. The result is an asymmetry of perception. We know the hunt, we do not know the hours of quiet cohesion that precede and follow it. Scientific observation over decades has painted a different picture. Researchers tracking resident pods in the Salish Sea documented intricate call repertoires unique to specific family groups. They observed cooperative childcare. They recorded behavior consistent with mourning after the loss of calves or matriarchs. They found that older females, long past reproductive age, played critical roles in guiding pods to food sources during lean years. None of this fits comfortably within the caricature of a mindless killer. And yet it would be equally misleading to swing to the opposite extreme, to sentimentalize the orca as a benevolent sea guardian. The point is not to replace one myth with another. It is to understand how initial framing shaped perception and how that perception lingers. Names anchor thought. Once an animal is introduced to culture under a banner of violence, it must work harder to be seen clearly. The orca's black and white body, stark and high contrast, perhaps contributed to this symbolic polarization. It looks dramatic. It looks designed for emblematic representation. It is easy to cast as villain, but scientific clarity requires distance from narrative inheritance. When marine biologists today observe orcas in the wild, they do not see random aggression. They see patterns, matrilineals that remain intact for decades, coordinated behavior that implies planning, restraint toward humans that suggests recognition rather than confusion. The gap between reputation and reality becomes harder to ignore. If early sailors had instead named the animal for its family bonds, or its vocal complexity, or its longevity, would perception be different? It is impossible to know. But what is certain is that language carved the first groove in collective understanding, and that groove deepened over centuries. Correcting it requires more than renaming. It requires sustained observation, a willingness to replace inherited imagery with accumulated evidence. The orca is still a predator. It still hunts with efficiency and at times astonishing coordination, but predation is only one facet of its existence. To reduce the animal to that single dimension is to misunderstand not just the species, but the ecosystem it inhabits. The ocean does not operate in moral binaries. It operates in energy transfer, survival strategy, adaptation. When we project human fear onto its inhabitants, we distort what we're trying to study. The process of unlearning the killer whale narrative is ongoing. It is embedded in how we write about them, film them, speak about them to children. It is present every time a headline chooses sensation over nuance, and it is precisely here that the deeper story begins, not with teeth, but with perception. Because once we set aside the inherited label, once we allow the animal to exist outside the frame of its misnomer, a different set of questions emerges. What kind of organism develops stable, multi-generational societies in the open ocean? What neurological architecture supports that stability? What environmental pressures shaped such a mind? The correction of misunderstanding is not an endpoint, it is a beginning. If the misunderstanding of orcas began with what we thought they were, the correction begins with what they are built to do. Strip away the inherited name, the folklore, the exaggerated teeth in old engravings, and what remains is an animal engineered with extraordinary precision for one environment, the open ocean. Every contour of its body, every layer beneath the skin, every adaptation in blood chemistry and neural wiring reflects long evolutionary negotiation with cold water, pressure, distance, and motion. The orca does not merely survive at sea, it is structured by it. From a distance, an orca's silhouette appears simple, a torpedo form, a tall dorsal fin, a sweeping tail fluke. Up close, that simplicity resolves into efficiency. The body tapers smoothly from a rounded rostrum to a powerful peduncle, minimizing drag as it moves through dense seawater. Water is nearly 800 times denser than air. Any inefficiency multiplies quickly. The orca's skin is smooth and specialized, constantly regenerating its outer layer to reduce friction. Studies have shown that cetacean skin can slough off microscopic imperfections, maintaining hydrodynamic performance in ways that naval engineers still study for inspiration. An adult male can reach speeds approaching 50 kilometers per hour in short bursts, not because it is built for constant sprinting, but because it is built for controlled acceleration. The tail flukes, composed of dense connective tissue rather than bone, oscillate vertically with immense power. Each stroke displaces a volume of water sufficient to propel several tons of muscle and blubber forward with surprising grace. Beneath the surface, that motion is quieter than one might expect. The open ocean rewards efficiency over spectacle. Insulation is equally critical. Much of the orca's mass is not muscle but blubber, a thick layer of lipid-rich tissue that can measure up to 10 centimeters in depth. Blubber serves multiple functions at once. It retains heat in waters that can hover just above freezing, allowing orcas to occupy polar and temperate regions alike. It acts as an energy reservoir, storing calories from successful hunts to buffer periods of scarcity. It contributes to buoyancy control, offsetting the density of muscle and bone. Yet this same adaptive layer has become a liability in the modern era. Blubber also stores fat-soluble toxins such as PCBs and other industrial pollutants. These compounds bioaccumulate up the food chain. As apex predators, orcas inherit the chemical history of their ecosystem, and their blubber becomes both shield and archive. The ocean writes itself into their bodies. The coloration that made them so symbolically stark also has functional roots. The black dorsal surface and white underside create countershading, a form of camouflage common in marine animals. Viewed from above, the dark back blends into the deeper waters below. Viewed from beneath, the pale belly merges with the brighter surface, light. Even the white eye patch may disrupt outline recognition, confusing prey about the true position of the eye. What appears dramatic to human observers is, in evolutionary terms, concealment. Cardiovascular adaptations support long dives and sudden exertion. Orcas are air-breathing mammals, yet they can remain submerged for more than 15 minutes when necessary. Their blood contains high concentrations of myoglobin, the oxygen-binding protein in muscle tissue, allowing them to store oxygen efficiently and release it gradually during dives. When submerging, they can reduce heart rate and redirect blood flow preferentially to essential organs, conserving oxygen for the brain and heart while peripheral tissues tolerate temporary reductions. This dive response is not unique to orcas among marine mammals, but its refinement allows them to pursue prey at depth with calculated endurance. Their lungs collapse safely under pressure, preventing nitrogen absorption that would otherwise cause decompression sickness. What would injure a human diver is routine for them. Respiration at the surface is equally deliberate. An orca exhales explosively through its blowhole, expelling warm air in a visible plume before inhaling rapidly. The exchange is efficient, replacing a large percentage of lung volume in a fraction of a second. In a pod, breathing can synchronize, surfacing rhythms aligning as if choreographed, though no conductor is visible. The mechanics are precise, but what defines their interaction with the ocean most profoundly is not movement or breath. It is sound. Light attenuates quickly underwater. Visibility can shrink to a few meters depending on turbidity. Sound, by contrast, travels nearly 5 times faster in water than in air and across vast distances. Orcas inhabit an acoustic landscape. The production of sound begins in complex nasal passages beneath the blowhole, where structures known as phonic lips generate clicks by forcing air through tissue folds. These clicks are focused forward by a fatty organ in the forehead called the melon. The melon functions as an acoustic lens, shaping and directing sound waves into the water column. When those clicks encounter objects, echoes return and are received primarily through the lower jaw, which is filled with specialized fats that conduct sound to the middle ear. From there, signals are transmitted to a highly developed auditory cortex. Echolocation is often described simply as biological sonar, but that comparison understates its sophistication. The returning echoes carry information about size, density, shape, even internal structure of objects. An orca can differentiate between fish species, detect air-filled swim bladders, and coordinate with pod members during pursuit, all in low visibility conditions. The precision of this system depends not only on acoustic anatomy, but on neural processing. And here the conversation returns to the brain. An adult orca brain can weigh around 5 kilograms, larger than a human brain in absolute mass. Size alone does not determine intelligence, but structure matters. The cerebral cortex is highly convoluted, increasing surface area. Of particular interest is the paralimbic lobe, more elaborated in cetaceans than in many terrestrial mammals. This region is associated with emotional processing and social behavior. Additionally, spindle neurons, specialized cells linked in humans and great apes to empathy, rapid social assessment, and intuitive decision-making have been identified in cetacean brains. These neurons support fast processing in complex social environments. Their presence suggests that the orca's cognitive world is tuned not only for hunting but for navigating intricate relationships. Neural density aligns with lived reality. Orcas operate within stable, multi-generational societies where recognizing individuals, recalling past interactions, and coordinating behavior are daily necessities. Memory is not optional, it is infrastructure. Lifespan reinforces this complexity. Female orcas can live into their 80s or even 90s under favorable conditions, while males typically have shorter lifespans, often reaching their 50s or 60s. The disparity is significant. Males grow larger, with dorsal fins that can exceed 1.8 meters in height, yet their longevity does not match that of females. The reasons are multifactorial, involving social structure, reproductive investment, and perhaps differential stress. What matters biologically is that extended female lifespan allows for decades of post-reproductive life. A rarity among mammals, that longevity anchors social continuity. Growth patterns reflect this division. Calves are born at roughly 2.5 meters in length and weigh around 180 kilograms. They double in size within the first year, sustained by rich maternal milk that can contain over 40% fat. Rapid growth demands high caloric intake, and maternal investment is intense. Males continue growing for longer periods than females, eventually achieving greater mass, yet they remain socially tied to their mothers throughout life. Even anatomy reinforces social dependence. Teeth, numbering between 40 and 56, are conical and interlocking, built to grip rather than chew. Orcas swallow prey in large pieces. The jaw musculature is powerful, but feeding efficiency depends on coordination. A solitary orca can hunt, but many strategies require collective timing. Muscle composition balances endurance and explosive force, reflecting a lifestyle that alternates between long-distance travel and sudden acceleration. Skin pigmentation patterns vary subtly between populations, and dorsal fin shapes can differ based on ecotype. Offshore orcas, for instance, often show more pronounced tooth wear, likely from shark predation habits involving abrasive dermal denticles. These physical differences hint at behavioral divergence. Anatomy does not exist in isolation. It tracks ecological niche. Even thermoregulation reveals adaptation. In cold waters, peripheral blood vessels constrict to conserve heat, while countercurrent heat exchange systems in flippers and dorsal fins minimize loss. Despite appearing exposed, these appendages regulate temperature efficiently. The orca's presence in Arctic waters, among sea ice and near-freezing temperatures, is not accidental expansion, but physiological capability. When considering the total design, hydrodynamic form, acoustic specialization, oxygen management, neural architecture, it becomes clear that the orca is not defined by any single trait. It is a composite of adaptations layered over millions of years. Evolution has not produced a caricature of violence. It has produced a highly integrated marine mammal whose physical and neurological capacities allow for flexibility across environments and social systems. The body is not an accessory to behavior, it enables it. The brain is not a detached organ of abstraction, it is calibrated to the sensory realities of water and sound. What early sailors saw as menace was in part a misunderstanding of efficiency. The same streamlined silhouette that frightened them is the product of hydrodynamic logic. The same dorsal fin that cut the horizon is a stabilizing structure aiding directional control at speed. The same teeth that appeared threatening are tools shaped by diet specialization. To understand the orca as a biological machine is not to reduce it to mechanism. It is to recognize coherence. Every system, from circulatory to acoustic to cognitive, operates in concert. Nothing is ornamental, nothing is wasted. The ocean exerts pressure not just physically but selectively. Only what works persists. And in the case of the orca, what has persisted is a form both formidable and finely tuned, capable of traversing vast distances, communicating across them, hunting with coordination, and sustaining social bonds over decades. The correction that began with a reconsideration of a name now deepens into recognition of structure. Before we can understand how they organize themselves, how they transmit knowledge, how they maintain culture, we must acknowledge the foundation on which those behaviors stand. The architecture is not incidental, it is prerequisite. The body gives the orca its power, but sound gives it its world. In water, vision narrows quickly. Light fractures, scatters, fades into blue and then into darkness. At a depth of only a few dozen meters, color dissolves into gradients. Beyond that, shapes blur into suggestion. For an animal that ranges across continental shelves, open pelagic zones, fjords, and ice-choked channels, relying primarily on sight would mean accepting constant uncertainty. Instead, the orca inhabits an environment built from vibration. The ocean is not silent. It is layered with acoustic information, currents shifting against rock, distant storms, the low-frequency moan of large ships, the crackle of shrimp colonies, the movement of fish schools as thousands of small bodies displace water at once. In this medium, sound travels nearly 5 times faster than in air, and with far less attenuation across distance. A low-frequency call can travel tens of kilometers under favorable conditions. To an orca, reality is structured by these transmissions. The mechanics begin with the clicks. Produced in rapid sequences known as click trains, they originate in the nasal passages where air is forced across phonic lips, creating sharp, broadband pulses. These clicks are focused forward by the melon, whose lipid composition allows it to act as an adjustable acoustic lens. By altering the shape of the melon subtly, an orca can modulate the beam of sound it emits. The click travels outward, strikes an object and returns as an echo. The lower jaw, filled with specialized fats, channels that echo toward the middle ear. From there, the auditory nerve carries it to a brain evolved to pass microsecond differences in timing and amplitude. The result is not a simple yes or no detection of presence, it is a spatial map. Distance can be calculated from delay. Size and density influence the strength and quality of the returning signal. Even internal structures, such as the air-filled swim bladder of a fish, produce distinctive acoustic signatures. Researchers have demonstrated that echolocating cetaceans can discriminate between objects differing by mere centimeters. For an orca pursuing salmon in turbid water or tracking a seal beneath an ice floe, this capacity is decisive. Yet echolocation is only one register of their acoustic repertoire. Orcas also produce whistles and burst pulses. Whistles tend to be tonal, frequency-modulated sounds that can carry over longer distances and are often associated with social communication. Burst pulses are rapid sequences of clicks used in close-range interactions, sometimes during coordinated movement or intense activity. Each category of sound has function, and function depends on context. The physics underlying this communication are precise. Sound waves in water propagate as compressions and rarefactions of molecules. Because water molecules are closer together than those in air, energy transfer is more efficient. However, frequency matters. High-frequency sounds provide fine resolution but attenuate more quickly. Low-frequency sounds travel farther but with less detail. Orcas navigate this trade-off dynamically. During foraging, high-frequency clicks provide detailed echolocation. During travel or social cohesion over distance, lower-frequency calls maintain contact. Pods develop distinctive dialects, sets of calls that remain stable over decades. In the northeastern Pacific, resident populations have been studied long enough to reveal that each pod possesses a unique acoustic signature composed of specific call types. These calls are not random, they're consistent, inherited, and recognizable to other members. When hydrophones are lowered into the Salish Sea and recordings are analyzed, researchers can identify which pod is present without visual confirmation, based solely on vocal pattern. The implication is profound. These animals do not merely produce sounds, they participate in vocal traditions. Calves are born into this acoustic culture. In their first months of life, they emit variable, immature vocalizations, practicing the building blocks of their pod's repertoire. Over time, through exposure and social reinforcement, their calls converge toward the established dialect. The process resembles language acquisition in humans more than instinctual vocalization in most terrestrial mammals. It requires listening, imitation, and correction within a social framework. The stability of dialect across generations suggests that vocal identity functions as a marker of belonging. Pods that share a dialect cluster within larger clans, and those clans maintain acoustic boundaries from others, even when ranges overlap geographically. Sound becomes both bridge and border. The contrast between resident and transient orcas illustrates the adaptability of this system. Residents, which primarily consume fish such as salmon, are highly vocal. Their prey does not possess acute hearing in the frequencies orcas use, so continuous communication during foraging poses little risk. Transients, by contrast, hunt marine mammals, prey with acute underwater hearing sensitive to predator cues. As a result, transient orcas adopt near silence while hunting. They reduce or eliminate vocalizations to avoid detection. This behavioral flexibility underscores the integration of sound and survival strategy. Silence, too, is communicative when understood in context. There are recorded instances where transients travel in coordinated formation without producing detectable calls, relying instead on visual cues and perhaps subtle body movements. In these moments, the absence of sound is as deliberate as its presence elsewhere. Long-distance communication expands the acoustic horizon further. Low-frequency calls can propagate across tens of kilometers, especially in channels where temperature and salinity gradients create sound channels that trap and guide waves. This phenomenon, known as the SOFAR channel in deep ocean contexts, allows sound to travel extraordinary distances with minimal loss. While orcas typically operate in shallower coastal waters than the deep ocean whales that exploit the SOFAR channel most dramatically, they still benefit from favourable acoustic conditions. A pod separated by kilometres can maintain contact through periodic calls, updating position and direction. For animals that range widely in search of prey, such communication preserves cohesion without requiring constant visual proximity. Human perception often underestimates the density of this acoustic environment because we experience water poorly without technological mediation. Divers report the muffled thud of distant boat engines or the faint crackle of reef life, but the fine detail available to an orca exceeds our sensory capacity. Hydrophone recordings reveal layers upon layers of information. In regions with heavy ship traffic, low-frequency noise can mask orca calls, forcing them to adjust amplitude or frequency to compensate, a phenomenon documented as the Lombard effect, where vocalizing animals increase volume in response to background noise. The ocean, once dominated by biological soundscapes, now carries industrial signatures. Orcas navigate both. There are moments captured by researchers when pods appear to pause and listen. Heads rise slightly above the surface, dorsal fins steady, bodies almost motionless. It is tempting to anthropomorphize these pauses as contemplation, but even without projecting human emotion, one can infer assessment. In an acoustic world, information arrives constantly. To move is to send ripples. To listen is to gather them. In coordinated hunts, acoustic cues synchronize action. During wave-washing behavior in Antarctic waters, multiple orcas align alongside an ice floe supporting a seal. At a signal not visible to human observers, likely a combination of body alignment and subtle vocal cue, they surge forward simultaneously, generating a wave that destabilizes the flow. Timing is exact. Whether the cue is a burst pulse or a shared learned rhythm, the execution depends on precise perception. Calves observing such events are immersed not only in visual spectacle, but in acoustic choreography. Over time, participation refines understanding. The integration of echolocation with social calls allows layered communication. An orca can emit clicks to scan the environment while simultaneously responding to a podmate's whistle. The brain processes these inputs concurrently, distinguishing echo from call, self-generated signal from received one. Neural circuits must pass timing differences on the order of microseconds to construct coherent maps. This cognitive demand likely shaped the expansion of auditory processing regions in the cetacean brain. The paralimbic structures discussed earlier are not abstract capacities. They support real-time navigation of a socially and acoustically dense world. There are documented cases of orcas responding to playback experiments in which recorded calls from familiar pods elicit approach behaviors, while unfamiliar dialects provoke curiosity but not the same affiliative movement. Such experiments, conducted with caution to avoid disturbance, reinforce the idea that vocal patterns encode social information beyond simple contact. Identity is audible. Even the surface behavior of breaching may carry acoustic significance. When an orca launches its body clear of the water and land with force, the impact produces a loud, percussive sound that can travel significant distances. Researchers have proposed that such behaviours may function as long-range signals under certain circumstances. The surface, then, is not merely boundary but amplifier. All of this complicates the earlier caricature. The so-called killer whale does not roam blindly through blue emptiness. It moves through a textured acoustic field, continually emitting, receiving, adjusting. Its world is not primarily visual spectacle but sonic structure. When early sailors glimpsed a dorsal fin slicing through waves, they saw only the visible fraction of an experience unfolding beneath. Below the surface, where light attenuates and myth dissolves, a more intricate reality persists, one in which families maintain cohesion across distance through dialect, in which hunting strategies hinge on calibrated silence, in which calves inherit not only genes but sound patterns, and in which perception itself is shaped by vibration rather than sight. The architecture described earlier, hydrodynamic form, oxygen management, neural density, finds purpose here. It supports immersion in a medium where communication and detection depend on physical principles unfamiliar to terrestrial intuition. To understand how orcas experience reality is to shift sensory perspective. The ocean is not emptiness punctuated by events. It is continuous information carried in waves, intersecting and refracting. Within that medium, the orca's life unfolds in frequencies we rarely hear, in distances we rarely perceive, in patterns sustained long before we lowered our first listening devices into the sea. Sound binds them across distance, but lineage binds them across time. Long before a calf understands the dialect of its pod, long before it can interpret the returning echo of a click, its life is already positioned within a structure older than itself. To be born an orca is not to enter the ocean alone. It is to emerge into a society that has been moving together for decades, sometimes for generations, carrying with it memory, roots, preferences, alliances, and habits that predate the newborn by half a century. Birth itself takes place entirely underwater. A pregnant female carries her calf for roughly 17 months, one of the longest gestation periods among marine mammals. During that time, the fetus develops within a fluid environment already resonant with the sounds of its family. Researchers studying fetal auditory development in cetaceans suggest that late-stage calves may perceive aspects of their mother's vocalizations before birth. If that is the case, then entry into the world is less abrupt than it seems. The acoustic signature of home has already been imprinted. Labour unfolds within the protective presence of the pod. Observational records from long-term field studies describe other females, often related individuals, remaining close to the expectant mother, adjusting speed, maintaining formation. When the calf is delivered, it typically emerges tail first, reducing the risk of drowning during the final moments of birth. Within seconds, adult females assist, nudging the newborn upward toward the surface. The first breath must come quickly. Unlike terrestrial mammals, there is no margin for delay. The calf's lungs inflate as it breaks through the interface between water and air, an explosive exhale followed by the first inhalation. In those initial minutes, coordination between mother and relatives is precise. A newborn orca, measuring around 2.5 meters and weighing approximately 180 kilograms, is powerful but inexperienced. It must learn buoyancy control, directional swimming, and breathing rhythm almost immediately. The pod does not disperse, it slows. The architecture of society flexes to accommodate vulnerability. This early period establishes dependency that will not dissolve quickly. Orca calves nurse for at least 1 year and often longer, sometimes up to 2 years or more. The milk is dense with fat, sustaining rapid growth. During the first months, the calf swims in what researchers describe as the echelon position, slightly behind and to the side of its mother's dorsal fin. In this placement, hydrodynamic advantage reduces the energy required to move, allowing the calf to draft in its mother's slipstream. The arrangement is not accidental. It is a natural adaptation that conserves strength during development. But proximity serves purposes beyond efficiency. From this position, the calf observes constantly. It hears the full range of the pod's vocal repertoire, feels the shifts in speed and direction that correspond to subtle acoustic cues. It witnesses hunting maneuvers, social interactions, and the boundaries that define affiliation. Learning is immersive. There is no formal instruction, no explicit correction visible to human observers. Instead, imitation shapes behavior. A calf experiments with vocalizations, producing variable sounds that gradually converge toward the pod's dialect. It mimics breaches and tail slaps in playful contexts long before those actions acquire strategic meaning. Play in this setting is rehearsal. Social learning extends beyond the mother. Alloparenting, care provided by individuals other than the biological mother, has been documented in resident populations. Older siblings, aunts, and even post-reproductive females assist in guiding and occasionally babysitting calves. This shared investment reinforces cohesion. The calf does not belong solely to one individual, it belongs to a lineage. Over time, distinctions between biological and social inheritance blur. Knowledge about migratory routes, seasonal prey availability, and safe travel corridors through complex waterways is transmitted not genetically but behaviorally. A matriline, defined by a female and her descendants, forms the fundamental social unit. Within this structure, sons remain with their mothers for life. This detail challenges common mammalian patterns, where males often disperse to avoid inbreeding or to establish independent territories. In orcas, male offspring reach sexual maturity around 15 years of age but do not leave their natal pod. They may mate with females from other pods, but they return to their mother's side afterward. Their survival and social integration remain tied to the matriline. The implications are significant. A male orca's identity is anchored in maternal association rather than territorial control. Observational data indicate that the presence of a living mother increases a male's life expectancy. Even fully grown, males towering with dorsal fins that can exceed 1.8 meters are frequently seen traveling directly adjacent to their mothers. The bond does not weaken with size. Multi-generational matrilines can persist for decades. Researchers in the northeastern Pacific have documented specific family lines continuously since the 1970s. Individual whales are catalogued by alphanumeric designations, their life histories tracked meticulously. Some matriarchs have guided their pods through multiple ecological fluctuations, their offspring producing offspring who in turn produce calves, all within the same social framework. This continuity allows for accumulation of experience. A grandmother may remember the timing of salmon runs during anomalous climate years decades earlier. That memory becomes actionable knowledge when similar conditions recur. From the calf's perspective, such history is invisible but influential. It grows into patterns shaped long before its birth. Mortality during the first year can be significant, particularly when food scarcity or toxin loads compromise maternal health. In those cases, the social fabric responds visibly. Pods have been observed slowing travel after the death of a calf, remaining near the mother as she carries the body for days. While interpretations must remain grounded in behavior rather than projection, the extended attention given to deceased calves suggests that social bonds are not superficial attachments. They are durable connections that influence movement and vocalization patterns. For surviving calves, dependency transitions gradually. By 2 years of age, most are supplementing milk with solid prey, learning to capture fish or participate in coordinated hunts. Yet even as foraging competence increases, social reliance persists. The matrilin provides protection, coordination, and identity. There is no solitary adolescence in the way humans conceive it. Maturity unfolds within constant proximity to kin. Acoustic identity further cements belonging. As calves refine their calls, they align with the specific repertoire of their pod. Dialect becomes audible lineage. In mixed gatherings where multiple pods overlap geographically, distinct call types signal affiliation. The calf learns not only what to say, but when to remain silent. Among transients, the discipline of quiet hunting is modelled from early on. Young whales observe the suppression of vocalization in the presence of acoustically sensitive prey. Restraint is learned behavior. The physical growth of the calf parallels cognitive expansion. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition of social interaction. Memory accumulates. The ocean becomes not an abstract expanse, but a mapped network of roots embedded in collective experience. The inherited identity of an orca is therefore layered: genetic, acoustic, spatial, relational. No single component defines it. Birth inserts the calf into a system already in motion, a system capable of adapting yet remarkably stable over time. This stability contrasts sharply with the early human portrayal of orcas as erratic predators. What appears from a distance as spontaneous aggression often emerges from deeply embedded social coordination. To be born an orca is to inherit not just physical capacity, but an entire framework of association. The newborn does not need to construct society from scratch. It steps into one. Over decades, as the calf matures into adulthood and perhaps into the role of parent, the cycle continues. Daughters eventually bear calves of their own, extending the matriline. Sons remain, contributing to social cohesion and genetic exchange beyond the pod without severing primary ties. The result is a web of relationships anchored by maternal lines, resilient enough to persist through environmental change, yet sensitive to loss when key individuals disappear. The dynasty is not a metaphor of dominance, but of continuity. It exists not in monuments or territory, but in memory, carried by living bodies travelling together through shifting seas. Within the continuity of a matriline, time does not flatten into sameness. It layers. Calves grow into adults, adults into elders, and in orca society some females continue living for decades after they have stopped giving birth. This fact alone sets them apart from nearly all other mammals. Menopause, the cessation of reproductive capability well before the end of life, is rare in the animal kingdom. Humans experience it. So do a few species of toothed whales, including orcas and pilot whales. In evolutionary terms, it presents a puzzle. Natural selection tends to favour traits that enhance reproductive output. Why would a species evolve a system in which females live long beyond their reproductive years? The answer, as field research increasingly suggests, lies not in reproduction itself but in survival. Female orcas typically bear their last calves in their late 30s or early 40s, yet many live into their 70s and 80s, with some documented individuals surpassing 90 years. This extended post-reproductive lifespan is not passive existence. It coincides with a role shift within the matriline. the grandmother becomes a repository of accumulated ecological knowledge. In resident populations of the northeastern Pacific, long-term demographic studies have revealed that the survival of offspring, particularly adult sons, is strongly correlated with the presence of a living post-reproductive mother. When a mother dies, the mortality risk for her adult male offspring increases significantly in subsequent years. This pattern persists even when controlling for age and environmental conditions. The mechanism is not mystical, it is behavioral. During years of low salmon abundance, when Chinook populations decline due to oceanic changes or river conditions, pods led by older females exhibit higher foraging success. These matriarchs appear to guide their families to alternative feeding grounds or to timing windows that younger individuals might not recognize. Memory, in this context, becomes a practical asset. Salmon runs are not identical year to year. Climate variability alters water temperature and prey distribution. An orca that has lived through multiple cycles carries experiential data, encoded not in written record but in neural pathways. When scarcity strikes, that memory can reduce search time, conserve energy, and increase survival probability. Researchers analyzing decades of observational data have documented specific cases in which pods with older females maintained better body condition during lean years compared to those without. The grandmother's influence is not abstract authority, it is navigational advantage. Leadership among orcas is subtle. There is no visible hierarchy enforced through aggression, yet travel direction often aligns with the movements of the eldest female. During coordinated travel, she frequently occupies a forward position. Younger individuals follow, adjusting pace and trajectory. This pattern has been observed repeatedly in resident populations. It is not absolute. Flexibility exists, but statistical trends indicate consistent guidance. The evolutionary reasoning behind menopause becomes clearer when framed in terms of inclusive fitness. A female that continues reproducing late into life competes with her own daughters for resources, potentially reducing the survival of grandchildren. By ceasing reproduction and instead investing in the survival of existing descendants, she enhances the propagation of shared genes more efficiently. Mathematical models of kin selection support this dynamic. In tightly bonded matrilineals where offspring remain with mothers for life, the relatedness structure favors such a shift. The grandmother hypothesis, first articulated in human evolutionary studies, finds parallel expression in orcas. The comparison to humans is not superficial. Anthropologists have long argued that post-reproductive women in hunter-gatherer societies contributed to group survival by sharing knowledge about food sources, social alliances, and environmental hazards. Similarly, elephants, another species with extended female longevity, rely on matriarchal memory to locate water during drought and to navigate migration routes. In both elephants and orcas, older females hold critical ecological knowledge that younger members have not yet acquired. The difference lies in environment. Elephants traverse savannas and forests. Orcas navigate dynamic marine systems. Yet the principle remains. Experience accumulated over decades translates into decision-making that benefits kin. There are documented cases in the Salish Sea where older females altered travel routes during years when salmon abundance shifted geographically. Younger whales, lacking that historical context, would have no internal map to consult. The matriarch's memory compresses decades of variability into actionable guidance. This compression reduces trial and error costs in an environment where mistakes can mean starvation. Observational accounts describe moments when pods encountering thin prey distribution lingered less in unproductive areas under the direction of older females. The exact cognitive processes remain beyond direct measurement, but the outcome is measurable: higher survival rates among related individuals. The grandmother's influence extends beyond navigation. Social cohesion also appears reinforced by her presence. Matrilines without an elder female sometimes fragment after her death, with subgroups travelling separately for extended periods. While such separations are not permanent dissolution, they indicate that stabilizing forces weaken when memory disappears. Stability in orca society is not enforced by dominance displays but by shared orientation toward feeding grounds, seasonal movements, and acoustic identity. The matriarch anchors that orientation. Physiologically, menopause in orcas mirrors aspects observed in humans. Ovarian follicle depletion leads to cessation of ovulation. Hormonal profiles shift. Yet unlike many terrestrial mammals where lifespan rarely extends far beyond reproductive years, the orca's endocrine system coexists with prolonged vitality. Post-reproductive females continue to forage, travel, and participate actively in pod life. They do not retreat from social engagement. Their physical condition often remains robust well into advanced age, barring ecological stresses. The selective advantage of this system likely solidified over millennia in environments where prey distribution fluctuated unpredictably. In stable, abundant systems, reproductive longevity might offer greater payoff. But in variable ecosystems, the value of informed guidance increases. The ocean's cycles, El Niño events, regime shifts in Pacific currents, fluctuations in salmon recruitment create conditions where historical memory confers resilience. The grandmother's brain becomes an adaptive archive. It is important not to romanticize this role as sentimental caretaking. The evolutionary calculus is pragmatic. Post-reproductive females enhance the survival of genes already present in their offspring and grandchildren. That enhancement may occur through food-sharing behaviors, leadership in travel, or social mediation during tension. For instance, older females have been observed positioning themselves between younger individuals during aggressive interactions, diffusing conflict through presence rather than force. Such behaviors contribute to group cohesion, indirectly supporting survival. The rarity of menopause among mammals underscores its significance. Among thousands of species, only a handful exhibit comparable patterns. The conditions necessary for such evolution include long lifespan, stable kin-based social structures, and ecological scenarios where knowledge transmission materially affects survival. Orcas meet these criteria. Their calves remain with mothers for life, creating high relatedness within pods. Their environment is dynamic and information-rich. Their cognitive architecture supports memory retention over decades. Together, these elements create a niche where ceasing reproduction can be advantageous. In practical terms, when a pod moves through coastal channels in late summer, following salmon returning to natal rivers, the path chosen may reflect decades of accumulated experience. A younger female, encountering her first years of scarcity, might not recognize subtle environmental cues, temperature gradients, shifts in current patterns that historically preceded prey movement. The grandmother, having witnessed similar patterns before, may adjust course earlier. Such decisions ripple through the matriline. Calves survive because their mothers survive. Mothers survive because they locate food efficiently. Efficient location depends on informed movement. The chain is continuous. Data collected by marine biologists over nearly half a century allow these have been documented leading pods across decades offers empirical weight to the argument. This is not conjecture derived from brief observation. It is built from thousands of field hours and carefully maintained catalogues of births and deaths. The presence of menopause in orcas therefore represents not anomaly but adaptation. It reveals that in certain ecological and social configurations, longevity without reproduction enhances overall genetic success. Memory, embodied in a living individual, becomes as critical as physical strength. In a species already defined by acoustic communication and matrilineal structure, the addition of extended female lifespan deepens complexity. The dynasty described earlier is not merely multi-generational, it is temporally stratified. Elders carry past, environments within them. When they disappear, the pod loses more than a body, it loses context. The inheritance carried by a matriarch is not limited to roots and seasonal memory. It extends into something less visible but equally powerful: preference. Not all orcas eat the same prey, travel the same distances, or respond to the same signals. Over decades of observation, marine biologists began to notice that certain pods behaved so differently from others that they might as well have belonged to separate species. Yet genetically, they were all Orcinus orca. The dividing line was not bone structure or coloration, it was culture. Along the Pacific coast of North America, 3 primary ecotypes have been identified: residents, transients, also known as Bigg's killer whales, and offshore orcas. They share the same waters at times, but they do not share the same lives. Resident populations specialize almost exclusively in fish, particularly Chinook salmon. Their movements track the migrations of salmon runs, and their vocal behavior remains highly active even during foraging, because fish lack the acute underwater hearing that marine mammals possess. Transients, by contrast, prey on seals, sea lions, porpoises, and even other whales. Their hunting style demands silence. Vocal restraint prevents detection by prey capable of perceiving orca calls. Offshore orcas, less studied due to their preference for deeper waters, are known to feed heavily on sharks and large fish. Their teeth often show significant wear, likely from the abrasive skin of sharks covered in dermal denticles. These dietary differences are not minor variations. They are defining characteristics that shape social behavior, movement patterns, and even physiology. What astonished researchers was not merely the specialization itself, but its rigidity. When salmon populations decline sharply, resident orcas do not simply switch to hunting seals, even though seals are abundant and accessible. Instead, they continue targeting salmon, often traveling farther or expending more energy in pursuit of diminishing returns. From a purely opportunistic perspective, this seems inefficient, but the explanation lies in learned behavior. Hunting techniques are not universally transferable. A resident pod has generations of accumulated skill in locating and capturing salmon. Transient pods possess finely tuned strategies for isolating marine mammals. These methods are complex and socially reinforced. Switching prey would require more than desire. It would demand retraining at the level of collective knowledge. Culture constrains choice. Over time, this behavioral segregation has influenced genetic divergence. Genetic studies reveal that resident and transient populations, despite overlapping ranges, rarely interbreed. The separation is not enforced by physical barriers, but by social boundaries. Dialects differ markedly between ecotypes. Social interactions across ecotype lines are minimal and typically non-affiliative. The result is reproductive isolation driven by behavior rather than geography. Evolution, in this case, follows cultural lines. What began as a preference for certain prey became, over generations, a mechanism shaping gene flow. This phenomenon challenges traditional views of evolution as solely the product of environmental pressures acting on random variation. In orcas, learned behavior modifies ecological niche, which in turn influences reproductive patterns, gradually reinforcing divergence. Culture becomes biologically consequential. Evidence of socially inherited traditions extends beyond diet. In the North Atlantic, certain pods engage in carousel feeding, a cooperative strategy where herring are herded into tight balls and stunned with tail slaps before consumption. Young whales observe and participate in these events, refining technique over years. The method is specific to certain groups and absent in others occupying similar waters. In Antarctic regions, some orcas perform wave washing to dislodge seals from ice floes, a tactic requiring synchronized movement and precise timing. This behavior too appears transmitted socially rather than genetically hardwired. Calves are seen practicing alongside adults, initially imprecise, gradually aligning with the rhythm of the group. The presence of such distinct traditions suggests that orca societies operate with internal norms. Cultural boundaries are maintained not through overt hostility, but through continuity of association. Pods travel with familiar companions, vocalize in shared dialect, and mate within established patterns that limit mixing. When individuals from different ecotypes encounter one another, they typically pass without integration. There is no large-scale blending of behaviors. This separation preserves specialized knowledge within each lineage. It also means that ecological shocks affect groups differently. A collapse in salmon stocks threatens residents disproportionately, while transients remain comparatively insulated due to alternative prey sources. Culture thus amplifies vulnerability in some contexts and resilience in others. The offshore ecotype presents further illustration. These whales spend extended periods in deep, open waters and are less frequently observed. When strandings occur, analysis of stomach contents often reveals shark remains. Their dentition bears evidence of this abrasive diet. Acoustic recordings indicate call patterns distinct from both residents and transients. Although comprehensive long-term studies are limited compared to coastal populations, available data support the interpretation that offshore whales represent another culturally and genetically differentiated group. Their habitat preference, prey choice, and social organization align to form a coherent identity. From a calf's perspective, none of this appears as abstraction. It manifests as routine. A resident calf learns to follow salmon migration routes and to vocalize freely while foraging. A transient calf learns silence and stealth. An offshore calf grows accustomed to deeper waters and different acoustic landscapes. These differences shape neural development, motor skills, and social interaction from an early age. The inherited identity described earlier acquires additional dimension here. It is not only who your mother is, it is what your pod does. Genetic analyses have revealed that divergence between resident and transient populations may date back thousands of years. Cultural specialization likely preceded and reinforced genetic separation. Once mating across groups diminished due to social avoidance, gene pools drifted apart. This dynamic exemplifies how non-genetic inheritance, knowledge, tradition, habit, can guide evolutionary pathways. The boundary between culture and biology blurs. The ocean provides opportunity, but tradition selects response. Researchers have documented cases where specific call types are unique, not just to ecotypes, but to individual pods within ecotypes. These vocal signatures function like family names spoken aloud in water. When pods encounter one another, call exchanges occur, but integration does not follow. The acoustic boundary signals difference clearly enough to prevent blending. This phenomenon parallels dialect distinctions in human societies that, over time, can reinforce group identity and limit intermarriage. The analogy is not perfect, but the structural similarity is striking. Even play behaviors exhibit variation. In some populations, breaching frequency differs. In others, specific prey handling techniques dominate. These patterns persist across generations. The persistence indicates transmission through observation and participation, rather than isolated innovation. Young whales raised without exposure to a particular hunting technique do not spontaneously develop it. They require models. This dependence on social learning strengthens group cohesion, while simultaneously constraining flexibility. When environmental conditions shift rapidly due to climate change or human impact, the rigidity of cultural specialization can become a liability. Residents dependent on Chinook salmon face nutritional stress when runs decline. Their reluctance or inability to diversify prey is not stubbornness, but structural limitation rooted in tradition. From an evolutionary standpoint, such rigidity would seem maladaptive. Yet over long timescales, specialization often confers efficiency. The trade-off lies between depth of skill and breadth of adaptability. Orcas have historically favored depth. The result is a mosaic of societies occupying overlapping waters but living distinct ecological realities. The presence of culture in a non-human species raises questions about the definition of culture itself. If culture is behavior transmitted socially rather than genetically, persisting across generations and shaping group identity, then orcas qualify unequivocally. Their traditions affect survival, reproduction, and ultimately, genetic structure. Culture in this case is not ornament. It is architecture. It influences who mates with whom, what is eaten, how hunting occurs, where travel routes lie, and how calves are raised. In evolutionary biology, niche construction describes the process by which organisms modify their environment, thereby altering selective pressures. Orcas engage in niche construction behaviorally. By committing to certain prey and strategies, they shape their own ecological context. Over time, these choices feed back into physical and genetic differentiation. The resident-transient divide is one of the clearest marine examples of this interplay. The stability of these cultural patterns underscores the continuity described earlier in matrilines and grandmothers. Knowledge flows downward through generations, but it also anchors the group in specific ecological roles. A calf does not merely inherit genes, it inherits an occupation. In a sense, it inherits a profession honed by ancestors. That profession guides daily movement and long-term fate. The broader implication is that evolution in highly social species cannot be fully understood without accounting for behavior. Genes provide potential. Culture channels it. In orcas, the channel is strong enough to sculpt divergence. The sea does not impose a single template on its inhabitants. Within its vastness, distinct societies emerge, not separated by walls but by learned difference. Specialization reaches its most visible expression in the act that first defined their reputation. Hunting is where anatomy, sound, social cohesion, memory and culture converge into action. It is also where misunderstanding took root, because predation observed without context can appear ruthless. Yet when examined closely, what emerges is not chaos but choreography. In Antarctic waters, where fragmented sea ice drifts across a grey horizon, seals often haul themselves onto floating floes to rest. From beneath, a dark shape approaches. One orca alone could not dislodge a seal perched on stable ice, but a group aligned side by side can alter the physics of the surface. Several whales position themselves parallel to the flow, their bodies partially submerged, dorsal fins cutting shallow arcs. At an almost imperceptible cue, perhaps a shift in alignment, perhaps a burst pulse too subtle for human ears, they accelerate in unison. Their combined mass pushes a swell of water forward. The wave rises against the ice, lifting and tilting it just enough to destabilize the seal's footing. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts. The whales reverse, reform, and surge again. Timing is exact. Too early and the wave dissipates. Too late and the seal regains balance. When the flow finally tips and the seal slips into the water, the advantage shifts instantly. The seal's refuge vanishes, and the whales, now in their element, pursue. Observers who have spent seasons in these regions note that calves often accompany adults during such events. They are positioned slightly behind the main line, close enough to watch, but not yet strong enough to generate meaningful force. In early attempts, juveniles may misalign or accelerate unevenly. Adults compensate. Over time, the younger whales adjust their movements to match the group rhythm. The technique is not instinctual in the sense of automatic execution. It is refined through participation. Thousands of kilometers away along the coast of Patagonia, a different strategy unfolds. Here, sea lion pups gather near shorelines during breeding season. The water shallows gradually onto sandy beaches. Orcas approach carefully, studying wave patterns and slope. In certain pods, adults intentionally propel themselves onto the beach in pursuit of prey, a behavior known as intentional stranding. The maneuver carries risk. A whale misjudging momentum or timing can strand fatally. Yet some groups perform it with remarkable precision. An adult surges forward on a breaking wave, sliding partially onto the sand, jaws closing around a sea lion pup. Then, using the next incoming wave, the whale pivots and wriggles back into deeper water. Calves observe from just beyond the break zone. Early in life, they practice in shallower water, approaching but not fully committing to the beach. In documented cases, mothers have been seen pushing juveniles gently toward shore during low-risk attempts, then guiding them back. Mastery requires repeated exposure. This is not a universal orca behavior. It is confined to specific pods, transmitted socially. The coastal geography, the prey distribution, and the accumulated experience of individuals converge to produce a localized tradition. Farther north along the Pacific coast, transients pursue marine mammals with silence and coordination. When targeting grey whale calves during migration, they operate as a team. Grey whales travel with mothers and newborn calves close to shore. Transient pods intercept them, sometimes isolating the calf from its mother. Observers have described sequences lasting hours, with orcas taking turns exhausting the calf, preventing it from surfacing to breathe efficiently. Adults in the pod appear to assume roles, some focusing on distraction of the mother, others on controlling the calf's movement. The process is not frantic. It is deliberate. Energy expenditure is calculated. A large prey item offers substantial caloric return, but the risk of injury from a protective mother is real. Coordination reduces that risk. Once the calf is subdued, feeding may be selective. There are recorded instances where specific body parts are consumed preferentially, leaving other portions behind. In South African waters, a striking pattern emerged in recent years. Carcasses of great white sharks began washing ashore with precise incisions behind the pectoral fins and livers removed. Marine biologists investigating these strandings linked the pattern to a pair of male orcas observed in the area. The whales appear to have developed a technique for flipping sharks into tonic immobility. a temporary state induced when certain sharks are inverted, then extracting the nutrient-rich liver. The precision of the cuts and the consistency of liver removal suggest learned behavior. Over time, great white sharks vacated regions where these orcas hunted, indicating that predator-prey dynamics can shift rapidly when a new strategy emerges. This behavior too is not global among orcas. It is localized, associated with specific individuals and potentially spreading within that social network. The pattern illustrates how innovation at the group level can influence ecosystem structure. Across these varied contexts, role specialization becomes apparent. During hunts, certain individuals initiate pursuit while others flank or block escape routes. Larger males may use their size to intimidate or physically manipulate prey, while smaller, more agile females execute precise movements. The distribution of effort suggests assessment of individual strengths. Such coordination requires communication, whether vocal or through subtle body cues. It also demands trust built through repeated association. Calves, embedded within this system, learn through proximity. They are not shielded from predation events but integrated gradually. In fish-eating resident pods, young whales practice chasing salmon, sometimes missing repeatedly before achieving success. Adults do not appear to punish failure. They continue moving, allowing juveniles to refine technique. In mammal hunting pods, the stakes are higher. Young whales may participate peripherally at first, observing how adults coordinate silence and positioning. Over years, they assume more active roles. Energy efficiency underpins these strategies. A failed hunt expends calories that must be replaced. Orcas do not chase indiscriminately. They assess prey condition, group size, and environmental variables before committing. For example, during herring hunts in the North Atlantic, whales herd fish into dense balls by releasing bubbles and swimming in tightening circles. Once the herring are concentrated, individuals strike with tail slaps to stun multiple fish at once, maximizing yield per effort. This method conserves energy compared to chasing scattered individuals. The principle is consistent across ecotypes: minimize risk, maximize return. The earlier caricature of relentless aggression dissolves under scrutiny. What remains is an animal engaged in strategic foraging shaped by cultural inheritance. Even the dramatic wave-washing of Antarctic seals is not constant spectacle. Pods may pass many flows without attempting dislodgement, selecting only those with favourable size or position. Patience precedes action. Risk is weighed. In the context of evolutionary fitness, this precision is essential. An injured orca cannot rely on medical intervention. A broken tooth, a deep wound from a struggling whale, or a severe stranding miscalculation can have long-term consequences. Therefore, techniques evolve that reduce exposure. Hunting grey whale calves may appear brutal to human observers, but from the orca's perspective it represents acquisition of a high-calorie resource that sustains the matriline for days. The moral dimension is human projection. The ecological dimension is energy transfer. The integration of hunting with social learning reinforces earlier themes of culture-shaping biology. Techniques persist because they are effective and because they are transmitted. If a matriarch masters a method, her descendants inherit both opportunity and constraint. A pod specializing in shark predation develops dental wear patterns consistent with that diet. Over generations, such specialization may influence selection pressures subtly. The relationship between behavior and evolution remains dynamic. The ocean provides varied prey, but orcas do not exploit all options equally. They commit to particular niches, In doing so, they refine predatory art into tradition. The word predator, stripped of its cultural weight, denotes an organism that consumes others to survive. Within that framework, the orca's hunting strategies represent efficiency honed by memory and coordination. The image that once dominated maritime imagination, an indiscriminate killer, fails to capture the calculated nature of these acts. Each technique, from beaching in Patagonia to flipping sharks in South Africa, reflects adaptation layered over time, supported by anatomy, acoustics, and social cohesion described earlier. Hunting is not separate from society, it is an expression of it. Precision in hunting, stability in family lines, dialects that persist for generations. These observations inevitably lead to a broader question that has hovered around orcas for decades. How intelligent are they really? Intelligence is a term burdened by comparison. It tempts us to measure other species against ourselves, to rank, to categorize, to search for reflections of human cognition in unfamiliar forms. Yet if we approach the question scientifically rather than sentimentally, a clearer picture emerges, one grounded not in admiration but in structure and behavior. An adult orca's brain weighs approximately 5 kilograms, making it one of the largest brains in the animal kingdom in absolute terms. Size alone, however, tells little. Elephants and some whales possess large brains as well, and even within species brain size varies. What matters more is the relationship between brain size and body mass, often expressed as the encephalization quotient. Orcas rank high on this scale among non-human animals, though not at the very top. Their EQ suggests substantial neural investment beyond what is required for basic bodily regulation. More revealing than overall mass is the organization of the brain itself. The orca cerebral cortex is deeply folded, increasing surface area available for neural processing. The complexity of cortical convolution correlates in many species with cognitive capacity. Within that cortex lies a region known as the paralimbic lobe, more elaborated in cetaceans than in most terrestrial mammals. This region integrates emotional processing with higher-order cognition. Its expansion implies a nervous system tuned to social nuance. Additionally, researchers have identified spindle neurons, also called von Economo neurons, in the brains of orcas and other large-brained cetaceans. In humans and great apes, these specialized cells are associated with rapid social evaluation, empathy, and intuitive decision-making. They allow for swift processing of complex social information, essential in large cooperative groups. The presence of spindle neurons in orcas suggests parallel pressures shaping neural architecture, the need to interpret and respond to subtle shifts in group dynamics. Intelligence in this context is less about abstract reasoning and more about managing relationships in real time. Behavioral experiments provide further insight. Mirror self-recognition tests, often cited in discussions of animal cognition, have been conducted with captive orcas. In such experiments, a mark is placed on a part of the animal's body that can only be seen via reflection. When presented with a mirror, the subject's reaction is observed. Evidence indicates that orcas, like dolphins and great apes, display behaviors consistent with self-recognition, inspecting the marked area or adjusting position to view themselves. While mirror tests are not definitive measures of self-awareness in the philosophical sense, they do demonstrate the capacity to distinguish between self and other visually. Cooperative problem-solving experiments reveal additional layers. In controlled settings, orcas have been trained to perform tasks requiring synchronized action, such as pressing underwater paddles simultaneously to receive a reward. In some variations, individuals must wait for a partner before acting. Successful completion requires not only understanding of the task, but awareness of the partner's role. Observations show that orcas can adjust timing, waiting for a slower partner rather than acting impulsively. This capacity for delayed action in service of cooperation aligns with what is seen in their natural hunting strategies. Yet laboratory tasks capture only fragments of cognitive expression. In the wild, tactical flexibility often provides more compelling evidence. The previously described shark predation behavior of South Africa illustrates innovation. Extracting livers from sharks requires specific technique, flipping the shark, maintaining position, accessing a particular organ. That behavior appeared relatively suddenly in recorded observations and spread within a localized group. Innovation, followed by social transmission, reflects not only learning but creative problem-solving under ecological pressure. Similarly, in some regions, orcas have been documented interacting with longline fishing vessels, removing fish from lines without ingesting hooks. This behavior demonstrates assessment of risk and reward, as well as capacity to exploit human activity without direct training. Such interactions indicate adaptability rather than rigid instinct. Social awareness extends beyond cooperation in hunting. In long-term studies of resident populations, researchers have observed nuanced responses to illness or injury within pods. Individuals slow travel when a member is compromised. Mothers support weak calves by positioning themselves beneath them, assisting buoyancy. During the well-documented case of a mother carrying her deceased calf for days, the pod remained nearby, adjusting speed. While caution is necessary to avoid anthropomorphic projection, the behavioral patterns indicate sensitivity to the state of others. Restraint toward humans further complicates simplistic views. As noted earlier, there are no confirmed fatal attacks by wild orcas on humans. Instances of close approach often involve curiosity rather than aggression. In areas where orcas encounter divers or swimmers, they may circle, observe, and depart without escalation. This restraint cannot be attributed to incapacity. It implies recognition and decision-making. The ability to inhibit predatory response in specific contexts suggests cognitive control over impulse. Comparative analysis with other large mammals reinforces the pattern. Elephants exhibit complex social memory. Dolphins demonstrate cooperative hunting. Primates show problem-solving capacity. Orcas share elements with each, but within an aquatic environment that imposes different sensory demands. Their intelligence is embedded in acoustics and movement rather than tool manipulation. Humans often equate intelligence with manual dexterity, yet in water, manipulation is less central than coordination and perception. Neural investment in auditory processing regions supports the earlier observation that their world is structured by sound. Processing echo returns, differentiating call types, maintaining dialect integrity, all require substantial cognitive bandwidth. Memory too is critical. Migration routes, prey timing, and social histories must be retained over decades. In species with long lifespan and stable group membership, forgetting carries cost. The grandmother's role described previously depends on such retention. Intelligence here intersects with longevity. It is important to delineate what intelligence in orcas does not necessarily imply. There is no evidence that they construct symbolic language, equivalent to human syntax, nor that they build material culture in the way humans do. Their intelligence is specialized, tuned to ecological and social challenges they face. Measuring it against human benchmarks risks distortion. Instead, examining it within context reveals appropriateness. Cognitive systems match to environmental complexity. Brain-to-body ratio analysis indicates neural surplus relative to basic survival needs. Spindle neurons indicate rapid social assessment capacity. Mirror tests demonstrate self-other distinction. Cooperative experiments show synchronization and delay tolerance. Field observations confirm innovation, restraint, and role differentiation. None of these alone defines intelligence conclusively. Together they form a converging body of evidence. The result is not a portrait of near-human mind nor of simplistic predator, but of a species whose cognitive architecture supports the layered society already described. The integration of anatomy, sound, culture, and hunting strategy finds coherence in the brain. Intelligence in this framing is not spectacle. It is infrastructure enabling stability and adaptation. For an animal once labelled a killer, the historical record with humans is unexpectedly quiet. Across centuries of shared ocean, through eras of wooden whaling ships and modern steel vessels, through diving expeditions and accidental encounters, there are no confirmed cases of a wild orca killing a human being. The absence is not a technicality buried in obscure archives. It is a well-documented fact repeated by marine biologists, historians, and conservation organizations alike. Considering the size, strength, and predatory capacity already described, this restraint demands examination. It cannot be explained by physical limitation. Adult male orcas weigh several tons, possess formidable bite force, and regularly subdue prey far larger than a human swimmer. The boundary, therefore, appears behavioral rather than mechanical. Historical accounts of close encounters reveal curiosity more often than aggression. In the 19th century, whalers sometimes reported orcas circling their boats, while processing carcasses, drawn perhaps by scent or activity. There are records of whales taking scraps thrown overboard, yet no credible documentation of deliberate attacks on crew. In more recent decades, divers have described moments when orcas approached within meters, studying them with apparent attention before departing. Underwater photographers recount instances where individuals passed slowly, maintaining eye contact, then shifted course without escalation. Such encounters are not universal. Orcas are not habitually interactive with humans, but when proximity occurs, it rarely transitions into predation. One documented case often cited involved a surfer in California who was bitten in the 1970s, an incident later interpreted as a case of mistaken identity, possibly confusing the surfboard silhouette with that of a pinniped. The injury was non-fatal, and the orca did not persist. Even in this rare instance, the behaviour did not resemble sustained attack. In Icelandic waters, during the late 20th century, fishing vessels reported orcas approaching boats, sometimes playing in bow waves. Fishermen described whales rolling near hulls, occasionally touching the vessel lightly. While such interactions can unsettle observers, they did not culminate in destructive aggression. The whales seemed to treat boats as moving objects of interest rather than prey. More recently, reports from the Iberian Peninsula have drawn attention to orcas interacting with sailboats, particularly targeting rudders. Since 2020, multiple vessels off the coast of Spain and Portugal have experienced damage after orcas repeatedly struck or bit rudders. The behaviour has been concentrated within a specific subpopulation and appears to involve a limited number of individuals. Importantly, despite the structural damage to boats, there have been no verified cases of whales attacking people during these incidents. The focus remains on the rudder, a moving underwater appendage that may produce acoustic signatures or vibrations resembling prey. Researchers analysing these events propose several hypotheses: play behaviour stimulated by the sensation of resistance, social transmission of a novel activity among juveniles, or response to prior negative encounters with boats. The pattern suggests localized cultural expression rather than species-wide aggression. The distinction between play and aggression becomes critical here. Play behavior in many intelligent species involves manipulation of objects, testing boundaries, and repetition of stimulating actions. In orcas, play has been observed with kelp, seaweed, and even live prey in non-feeding contexts. Juveniles may toss fish or practice tail slaps absent immediate consumption. When applied to anthropogenic objects such as rudders, play may inadvertently cause damage. However, intent in such cases differs fundamentally from predatory motivation. The whales are not consuming humans, they are engaging with a stimulus. Theories about species recognition provide another lens. Orcas possess sophisticated echolocation and visual processing capacities. It is plausible that humans do not register as typical prey profiles. Our body shape, movement patterns, and acoustic signatures differ markedly from marine mammals that constitute natural prey. Even swimmers produce splashing rhythms unlike those of seals. Additionally, cultural traditions constrain prey selection. Resident fish-eating pods have no history of mammal predation. Transients specializing in marine mammals may recognize humans as unfamiliar rather than prey. Cultural conservatism in diet, discussed earlier, likely reinforces this boundary. There is also the possibility of learned avoidance. In regions with historical whaling or active boat traffic, orcas may associate humans with risk. Avoidance rather than aggression would then dominate, yet avoidance does not fully explain close approaches documented by divers. The behavioral pattern seems more nuanced, assessment without attack. Comparative examples from captivity highlight the distinction between wild and confined contexts. In marine parks, there have been tragic incidents where captive orcas injured or killed trainers. These events occurred in environments radically different from open ocean conditions. Limited space, artificial social groupings, stresses inherent to confinement. While not dismissing the seriousness of those cases, extrapolating them to wild behavior misrepresents context. Wild orcas operate within stable social units and expansive territories. The psychological and environmental variables differ profoundly. The absence of fatal wild attacks over centuries suggests that whatever cognitive processes guide predation include a filter that excludes humans as targets. Social awareness and restraint, referenced previously in discussions of intelligence, likely contribute. Predatory behavior is not automatic reflex. It involves assessment. In mammal hunting, pods, attacks on seals or porpoises follow coordinated positioning and strategic silence. There is no evidence of similar coordination directed at humans in the wild. Observers of close encounters frequently describe whales altering course after inspection. It is as if the evaluation concludes without triggering pursuit. This boundary does not render orcas benign in a sentimental sense. They remain apex predators capable of lethal force. The boundary instead illustrates selectivity. Selectivity implies cognition. When a transient pod isolates a grey whale calf, the behaviour is context-specific, guided by tradition as necessity. When a diver drifts in the same waters, the absence of attack indicates discrimination. That discrimination may arise from cultural diet constraints, species recognition through echolocation, or learned avoidance patterns. It may also stem from social norms within pods, though such norms remain speculative. What can be stated with confidence is empirical, wild. Orcas do not have a record of hunting humans. Media portrayals often emphasize rare dramatic footage, reinforcing the earlier narrative of danger. Yet when statistical reality is considered, the risk posed by wild orcas to humans is negligible compared to numerous other marine hazards. The fear persists largely because of size and name rather than data. Understanding this does not require idealization, it requires contextualization. The same species capable of sophisticated cooperative hunts demonstrates consistent non-lethal interaction with humans across time and geography. That consistency strengthens the argument that the boundary is structural, not incidental. Acoustic perception may play a role as well. Human vocalizations underwater differ significantly from marine mammal calls. Orcas likely perceive divers as acoustically anomalous. Combined with visual cues, lack of blubber, unusual limb movement, the mismatch with prey templates may prevent predatory sequence initiation. The predator-prey dynamic depends on recognizable patterns. Without pattern match, pursuit may not engage. There are recorded instances where orcas assisted distressed humans indirectly. In one anecdotal case, whales reportedly surrounded swimmers while sharks were present, a story often retold though difficult to verify scientifically. Even if such accounts are embellished, they underscore public fascination with the idea of protective behavior. Scientific caution advises restraint in interpreting motive. What remains grounded is the absence of aggression. The Iberian rudder interactions highlight how quickly narratives can escalate. Headlines describing attacking orcas evoke menace, yet detailed analysis reveals a narrow behavioral pattern centered on specific boat components. Damage to property, while concerning for sailors, does not equate to predation on people. Behavioral ecologists caution against conflating object-focused play or irritation with intent to harm humans. The distinction matters because it shapes policy and perception. The boundary with humans, therefore, reflects a complex interplay of recognition, culture, cognition, and ecological specialization. It challenges the original misnomer without replacing it with mythic benevolence. Orcas are neither indiscriminate killers nor oceanic guardians. They are selective predators operating within traditions that exclude us from their prey lists. The result is a long historical coexistence marked more by observation than violence. In societies built on continuity, loss does not pass unnoticed. When a pod member dies, the change is not only numerical, it alters movement patterns, vocal exchanges, leadership structure, and in some cases long-term survival probabilities. Because orcas travel in stable matrilines where individuals remain together for decades, absence is immediately perceptible. The ocean does not conceal disappearance within anonymity. Each whale carries a specific dorsal fin shape, a unique saddle patch, a distinct call signature. When one of those signatures falls silent, the gap is measurable. One of the most widely observed examples occurred in 2018 when a female southern resident orca known as J35, commonly called Tahlequah, gave birth to a calf that died shortly after delivery. Instead of abandoning the body, she carried it on her rostrum for 17 days, travelling over 1,000 miles through the Salish Sea. Field researchers documented the behaviour carefully, recording duration, travel distance, and the responses of other pod members. The event drew global attention, often framed emotionally. Yet beneath the headlines, the data revealed specific behavioural patterns. Tahlequah was not isolated. Other pod members remained nearby, adjusting pace as she slowed to retrieve the calf each time it slipped beneath the surface. The extended carrying imposed energetic cost. Each retrieval required diving and lifting. The act persisted beyond what could be explained as confusion about the calf's condition. Similar behaviours have been recorded in other cetacean species, including dolphins and pilot whales, though duration varies. From a behavioral science perspective, such carrying indicates strong mother-offspring bonding and difficulty disengaging from that bond when death occurs. It does not require projecting human grief to recognize attachment. Attachment has evolutionary roots. It ensures care during vulnerability. When the bond is abruptly severed, behavioral residue may remain. Observations across populations suggest that mortality events can influence vocal activity. Some researchers have noted periods of reduced vocalization following the death of a pod member, particularly a calf or matriarch. In highly vocal resident populations, shifts in call frequency or amplitude have been detected after such events. The mechanisms remain under study, but decreased acoustic output may reflect altered social interaction or reduce foraging coordination during transitional phases. Silence, in a species whose identity is tied to sound, carries weight. The loss of a matriarch introduces more profound structural effects. Long-term demographic studies in the northeastern Pacific have documented that when an older female dies, especially one past reproductive age, her matriline may experience increased mortality in subsequent years. Adult sons show particularly elevated risk, consistent with earlier findings about maternal influence on survival. The removal of accumulated ecological knowledge can disrupt efficient foraging. Younger females may assume leadership roles, but experiential gaps remain. Social fragmentation sometimes follows. Subgroups may travel separately for extended periods, reducing coordinated hunting success. Over time, fragmentation can affect reproductive rates. In small endangered populations such as the southern residents, each death carries disproportionate demographic impact. With fewer than 80 individuals remaining in recent years, the loss of a single reproductive female or elder can shift population trajectory measurably. Models projecting population viability incorporate age structure precisely because of these dynamics. Grief, in this context, is not defined by internal emotional states, but by observable changes in behavior and survival. Field researchers tracking individuals over decades have noted that some whales exhibit prolonged association with the location of a deceased calf, revisiting the area in subsequent days. Whether this represents search behavior or routine travel is debated, but pattern recognition across cases suggests more than coincidence. In social species with strong bonds, death interrupts established patterns abruptly. The response can manifest as temporary disorientation in travel routes or feeding focus. Mortality also alters acoustic landscapes. Each individual contributes distinct calls to the pod's repertoire. When a whale dies, certain call types may diminish or disappear if closely associated with that individual. Over long periods, dialect may shift subtly as generational turnover occurs. The stability described earlier is resilient but not immutable. It evolves in response to births and deaths. Studies of strandings and necropsies reveal additional consequences. In populations exposed to high toxin loads, calves may die shortly after birth due to immune suppression or malnutrition. Repeated reproductive failure affects social dynamics. Females without surviving. Offspring may alter association patterns, spending more time with siblings or mothers. Such adjustments ripple outward. Demographic data collected since the 1970s show that periods of prey scarcity correlate with increased calf mortality, compounding stress on matrilines. The interplay between ecological pressure and social structure becomes visible in these moments. When a matriarch dies during a time of low salmon abundance, the combined loss of leadership and food amplifies risk. Statistical analyses confirm that pods lacking older females during scarce years show lower survival than those retaining them. The biological consequence of death extends beyond the individual body. It reshapes the social matrix. Observational science avoids attributing human-like mourning rituals without evidence. However, repeated documentation of altered behavior following death, carrying bodies, reduced vocalization, slowed travel, demonstrates that loss is not neutral within orca society. The structure described in earlier chapters depends on continuity. Each death removes a node from that network. In long-lived species with slow reproductive rates, recovery from demographic shock can take decades. For critically endangered populations, the margin is thin. The southern resident community, for example, has experienced fluctuations linked to salmon availability, toxin exposure, and vessel disturbance. Every calf that fails to survive represents not only immediate loss, but diminished future reproductive potential. Longitudinal data sets maintained by marine research organizations allow scientists to quantify these effects. Birth rates, calf survival percentages, age distribution curves. These metrics transform individual stories into population-level trends. The carrying of a calf by Tahlequah was a visible expression of attachment. The underlying demographic context included declining salmon runs and elevated contaminant levels. Behavioral expression and ecological pressure intersect. Social fracture does not always present dramatically. Sometimes it appears as subtle shifts in association. After the death of an elder, younger whales may spend more time near similarly aged peers, altering cohesion patterns. Acoustic recordings may reveal changes in call exchange frequency. Such variations accumulate gradually. The resilience of orca society lies in its capacity to absorb loss without immediate collapse. Yet resilience has limits. Small populations with restricted prey face compounded risk when elders disappear. The removal of cultural memory, as discussed previously, weakens navigational advantage. In environments undergoing rapid change, that weakness can translate into measurable decline. Grief, therefore, is not framed here as emotional narrative but as structural consequence. Attachment ensures cooperative care and learning. Its disruption produces behavioral reverberations. The ocean does not pause when a whale dies. Currents continue prey, migrate, seasons shift. Yet within the pod, adjustments occur. Travel speed may alter, vocal exchange may quiet, leadership may redistribute. Over years, demographic patterns reflect cumulative events. The stability that characterizes orca society is dynamic, constantly recalibrated in response to births and deaths. Each absence leaves trace evidence detectable through careful observation. An apex predator occupies the top of a food web, but that position does not grant independence from what lies beneath. It creates dependence of a different kind. When the lower levels shift, the effects move upward, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly. For fish-eating orca populations along the Pacific coast, particularly the southern residents, the foundation of their ecological world is salmon, and more specifically Chinook salmon. These fish are not simply prey, they are high-calorie fuel precisely matched to the energetic demands of large marine mammals. Chinook are the largest of the Pacific salmon species, rich in fat and capable of delivering substantial energy per capture. For decades, resident pods timed their movements to intercept salmon returning from the open ocean to spawn in natal rivers. The rhythm was predictable enough to anchor seasonal patterns, but over the past century, river systems have been altered extensively. Dams block migration routes, reducing spawning habitat. Logging and urban development increase sedimentation and raise water temperatures. Overfishing in both ocean and river contexts further reduces adult returns. Climate change compounds the problem by warming ocean waters, affecting salmon survival during their marine phase. The cumulative result has been a decline in Chinook abundance across many regions. When salmon runs falter, resident orcas must travel farther and spend more time searching. Field observations during low salmon years show whales in thinner body condition, with visible depressions behind the skull and along the flanks. Photogrammetry using drones has allowed researchers to quantify changes in body shape across seasons, linking reduced fat reserves to prey scarcity. Nutritional stress manifests not only in appearance, but in reproductive outcomes. Data collected over decades indicate that pregnancy failure rates rise during years of poor salmon availability. Female orcas may conceive but subsequently lose fetuses, likely due to insufficient energy reserves. The energetic demands of gestation and lactation are high. When intake falls below threshold, reproduction is compromised. In small populations, repeated reproductive failure has cascading demographic effects. Fewer calves mean fewer future breeders, compounding vulnerability. The ecosystem challenge extends beyond prey quantity. It includes chemical legacy. Industrial compounds such as polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs were widely used in electrical equipment and other applications during the mid-20th century, before being banned in many countries. Despite restrictions, PCBs persist in the environment due to their chemical stability. They accumulate in fatty tissues of organisms and magnify up the food chain through bioaccumulation. Small fish ingest contaminated particles. Larger fish consume many smaller fish. Marine mammals consume many fish. Apex predators concentrate the highest levels. Orcas, with their thick blubber layers, become repositories of these compounds. Blubber, earlier described as insulation and energy reserve, also serves as storage for fat-soluble toxins. When food is abundant, toxins remain sequestered in adipose tissue. But during periods of nutritional stress, when whales metabolize fat reserves for energy, those stored toxins are released into the bloodstream. Elevated PCB levels have been associated with immune suppression, reduced fertility, and developmental issues in marine mammals. Studies analyzing tissue samples from stranded or biopsied whales reveal some of the highest PCB concentrations recorded in wildlife globally, particularly in populations inhabiting industrialized coastal waters. Immune suppression is not immediately visible but measurable through increased susceptibility to disease. In populations already stressed by food limitation, weakened immune response can exacerbate mortality. Calves, with developing immune systems, are particularly vulnerable. Toxins can also transfer from mother to calf through milk, concentrating exposure during early life stages. This creates a paradox. The very blubber that sustains a calf through high-fat milk may simultaneously deliver contaminant load. Nutritional stress and toxin burden interact. A whale in robust body condition may tolerate contaminant levels without acute symptoms, but when prey declines and fat metabolism accelerates, toxin release intensifies. Reproductive impairment has been linked to this process. Models estimating population growth under varying PCB concentrations suggest that some groups may experience long-term suppression of recovery potential due to chemical exposure alone, even if prey were to rebound partially. The concept of apex predator invulnerability dissolves under such analysis. Power in predation does not shield against systemic change. Orcas cannot easily diversify diet across ecotypes due to cultural specialization. Residents do not readily shift to marine mammals even when fish are scarce. This rigidity, advantageous in stable ecosystems, becomes liability under rapid anthropogenic alteration. Offshore populations feeding heavily on sharks encounter different toxin profiles but remain subject to similar bioaccumulation processes. Climate change adds additional complexity. Warming oceans alter salmon distribution and productivity. Marine heat waves have been associated with reduced prey availability in certain regions. Orcas, whose life histories unfold over decades, face environmental shifts at unprecedented speed. Adaptation through cultural transmission may buffer short-term variability, but structural habitat changes outpace memory when underlying conditions transform. Vessel traffic introduces further stressors. Increased shipping noise can interfere with echolocation and communication, forcing whales to expend additional energy to locate prey. Noise pollution overlaps with foraging grounds in many coastal areas. Chronic disturbance may elevate stress hormones, influencing immune function and reproduction. While not as immediately lethal as starvation or toxin exposure, cumulative stress reduces resilience. Longitudinal monitoring of the southern resident community reveals a population fluctuating around precarious numbers. Calf mortality, reduced birth rates, and occasional recovery periods illustrate the delicate balance between prey availability and survival. Conservation efforts targeting salmon restoration, dam removal, and toxin cleanup aim to address root causes. Yet recovery of ecosystems occurs slowly. Generational turnover in salmon stocks and chemical degradation timelines extend beyond immediate intervention. In other regions, orca populations appear more stable or even increasing, particularly mammal hunting transients whose prey base has expanded with recovering seal and sea lion numbers following protective legislation. This contrast underscores how ecological context shapes vulnerability. Apex status does not confer uniform outcome, it magnifies underlying conditions. The broader lesson embedded in these patterns is structural dependence. Orcas sit atop complex food webs integrating freshwater rivers, coastal estuaries, and open ocean systems. Disruption at any level, overfishing, habitat alteration, pollution, climate change, propagates upward. Their size and intelligence do not exempt them from ecological arithmetic. Instead, their longevity makes them sensitive indicators of cumulative change. Tissue samples archive chemical history. Demographic curves reflect prey trends. Behavioral adjustments reveal stress. The image of the orca as untouchable predator dissolves further under examination of ecosystem fragility. Strength in hunting does not equal immunity to systemic decline. When salmon collapse, body condition thins. When blubber metabolizes, toxins circulate. When calves fail to survive, matrilines contract. The chain of cause and effect spans habitats and decades. In Understanding What Happens When the Ecosystem Fails, we see that apex predators are not external overseers but integrated participants. Their fate is intertwined with rivers, fisheries, and industrial policy as surely as with hunting skill. When an animal shaped by vast coastlines, migratory routes, acoustic horizons, and multi-generational kinship is placed inside a concrete enclosure, the contrast is not only spatial, it is structural. Captivity does not simply reduce range, it removes ecological context. The hunting strategies described earlier disappear, the dialect continuity becomes fragmented, the matrilineal stability dissolves. What remains is a large, intelligent marine mammal in an artificial environment, sustained by human provision rather than self-directed foraging. In the wild, female orcas commonly live into their 70s or 80s, with documented individuals reaching 90 years of age. Males often live into their 50s or 60s. In captive settings, historical records show markedly shorter average lifespans. though figures vary depending on period and facility. Early captive individuals frequently survived only a few years after capture. Improvements in veterinary care and nutrition extended longevity somewhat over time, but median lifespans in captivity have generally not matched those observed in stable wild populations. The discrepancy cannot be explained solely by medical variables. It reflects systemic differences in environment and social structure. In the wild, daily movement can span tens of kilometers. Pods navigate complex coastlines, adjust depth, respond to shifting prey, and engage in continuous acoustic exchange. In a tank, physical boundaries constrain movement to limited circuits. The absence of hunting eliminates a core behavioral repertoire. Food arrives at predictable intervals. While adequate caloric intake can be maintained, the process of acquiring prey, the coordination, timing, and role differentiation, is absent. Behavioral stress indicators in captivity have been documented extensively. Stereotypic behaviors, defined as repetitive actions with no apparent goal or function, appear in some captive individuals. These may include repetitive circling, head bobbing, or chewing on tank fixtures. Such behaviors are commonly associated with environmental deprivation in intelligent mammals. Social deprivation compounds the issue. In natural matrilineals, individuals remain with relatives for life. Captive groupings often assemble unrelated whales from different ecotypes or geographic regions. Dialects do not align. Social bonds must be constructed without shared lineage. Transfers between facilities, a routine management practice in past decades, disrupted associations further. Instances of aggression between captive individuals have been recorded, sometimes resulting in injury. While aggression also occurs in the wild, it is typically embedded within stable hierarchies and kin-based relationships. Artificial group composition alters dynamics. Dorsal fin collapse offers a visible marker of physiological difference. In the wild, the tall dorsal fins of adult males remain upright, supported by connective tissue and consistent hydrodynamic pressure as whales travel long distances. In captivity, a significant proportion of males exhibit partial or complete dorsal fin collapse. The precise mechanisms are debated, but contributing factors likely include reduced sustained swimming, altered water pressure exposure, and possible changes in connective tissue integrity. While dorsal fin collapse can occur in wild individuals occasionally, its prevalence in captive males is markedly higher. The phenomenon underscores how even structural features respond to environmental context. Genetic bottlenecks emerged as a consequence of limited founding individuals in captivity. A relatively small number of wild-caught whales form the basis of breeding programs. Over time, repeated breeding among a restricted gene pool increased relatedness within captive populations. While genetic management plans attempt to minimize inbreeding, the original narrow base imposes constraints. In the wild, gene flow occurs through mating between pods, even while matrilines remain intact socially. The natural system balances cohesion with periodic genetic exchange. Captivity, particularly in its earlier decades, narrowed that exchange artificially. Cognitive engagement shifts as well. In structured training sessions, orcas learn to perform behaviors in response to cues, demonstrating memory and responsiveness. These performances often showcase intelligence through compliance and timing. Yet cognitive stimulation in captivity differs fundamentally from wild problem solving. The unpredictability of prey behavior, environmental variability, and acoustic complexity in the open ocean provide continuous adaptive challenges. In tanks, environmental variables are controlled. While enrichment activities attempt to introduce novelty, the scale and diversity cannot replicate natural conditions. Cognitive stagnation, defined not as loss of ability, but as reduced opportunity for spontaneous problem-solving, becomes a concern in such contexts. The ecological removal inherent in captivity thus affects multiple layers: lifespan distribution, social continuity, behavioral repertoire, genetic diversity, and cognitive engagement. It is not necessary to frame this contrast in emotive terms to recognize disparity. The wild orca's existence is defined by movement through dynamic systems, guided by matriarchal memory and cultural specialization. Captivity replaces those systems with static boundaries and human scheduling. Some captive-born individuals have never experienced open ocean conditions, raising complex questions about learned behavior absent natural reference. Without exposure to traditional hunting techniques, dialect inheritance, or migratory routes, cultural transmission narrows to what can be maintained within artificial groupings. The removal from ecosystem described in the previous chapter becomes literal here. Instead of depending on salmon abundance or shark populations, captive whales depend on supply chains and veterinary oversight. Instead of adjusting travel in response to ocean currents, they navigate fixed walls. Instead of social structure emerging organically from matrilineal continuity, it is managed administratively. Comparative studies between captive and wild populations continue to refine understanding of health metrics, stress hormone levels, and mortality causes. Some facilities report improvements in husbandry practices over time, including larger enclosures and social grouping adjustments. Yet the fundamental difference remains. Captivity severs the link between predator and ecosystem. The apex predator becomes a display animal. The cultural framework described earlier, specialized prey selection, dialect integrity, matriarchal leadership, cannot be fully expressed under such conditions. This is not an argument framed as advocacy within this narrative, but an examination of ecological removal. When culture is stripped away, what persists is the biological organism, still intelligent, still physically formidable, but operating in a reduced field of possibility. The distinction clarifies how deeply intertwined behavior and environment are in orca life. Ecological removal in captivity is an abrupt separation, but in the wild the separation unfolds gradually, carried not by walls but by temperature and ice. Over the past several decades, satellite imagery has documented a consistent decline in Arctic sea ice extent, particularly during summer months. The seasonal minimum shrinks, multi-year ice thins, and passages that once remained choked with frozen barriers open for longer periods each year. For species adapted to ice-dependent environments, these changes alter habitat fundamentally. For orcas, whose physiology allows tolerance of cold water, but whose large dorsal fins can make navigating heavy ice risky, retreating ice presents opportunity. Historical records from indigenous Arctic communities and early explorers describe orcas as rare visitors in certain high-latitude regions. Thick, persistent sea ice limited their movement. In recent years, however, observational data confirm increasing sightings of orcas farther north, including in areas of the Canadian Arctic archipelago and around Greenland. Acoustic monitoring has detected their presence in channels previously inaccessible for much of the year. The expansion is not random wandering, it aligns closely with sea ice retreat patterns. As ice-free windows lengthen, corridors open. Orcas follow prey. One of the most notable ecological consequences of this northward expansion involves narwhals. Narwhals, often called the unicorns of the sea for their elongated tusks, evolved in Arctic conditions where dense ice provided refuge from large predators. They are adept at navigating leads and breathing holes, and historically their primary predators were polar bears and occasionally humans. The arrival of orcas introduces a new dynamic. Narwhals lack the high-speed escape capacity of some other cetaceans and rely heavily on ice cover as protection. When orcas enter Arctic fjords during open water periods, narwhal behavior shifts. Studies using satellite tags show narwhals altering movement patterns in response to orca presence, sometimes fleeing into shallower or more constricted waters. Documented predation events have increased in frequency in regions experiencing significant ice loss. This change cascades beyond individual hunts. Narwhals play roles in Arctic marine ecosystems, influencing prey populations and serving as cultural and subsistence resources for indigenous communities. Increased orca predation may alter narwhal distribution and local abundance. Similarly, beluga whales, another Arctic species adapted to ice edge environments, face heightened predation pressure as open water periods extend. Orcas, with their cooperative hunting techniques, can exploit these conditions effectively. The Arctic shift thus illustrates ecological flexibility in orcas, the capacity to adjust range in response to environmental opportunity. Their blubber insulation and oxygen management allow them to operate in near-freezing waters without physiological strain. Yet flexibility does not imply neutral outcome. As apex predators enter systems previously structured without them, trophic relationships recalibrate. Fish species distribution also changes with warming temperatures. Arctic cod, central to many northern food webs, respond to sea temperature shifts, potentially altering availability for seabirds and marine mammals alike. Orcas, integrating into these evolving systems, become both beneficiaries and agents of change. Adaptability has long been part of orca survival. Cultural specialization remains evident even in northern expansions. Not all pods move north equally. Those with traditions of marine mammal hunting may find Arctic prey profiles more compatible than fish specialists. Acoustic recordings in northern waters reveal call types consistent with known ecotypes, suggesting that expansion reflects movement of specific populations rather than wholesale redistribution. This distinction matters. Climate change does not erase cultural boundaries, it intersects with them. The expansion into Arctic regions underscores the interplay between environmental change and learned behavior. A pod accustomed to navigating complex coastal systems may apply similar coordination in fjord networks newly accessible due to ice melt. Calves accompanying adults in these ventures encounter unfamiliar prey and acoustic conditions, expanding experiential knowledge that may shape future patterns. At the same time, imbalance looms. The Arctic ecosystem evolved with seasonal ice as structuring force. Removal of that force affects primary productivity, plankton blooms, and fish recruitment cycles. Orcas, while adaptable, remain dependent on stable prey bases. If warming trends disrupt Arctic food webs beyond a threshold, short-term expansion could give way to instability. Climate models project continued ice decline under current emission trajectories. The ecological flexibility demonstrated by orcas does not shield them from eventual system-wide effects. It allows initial response. Observers in northern communities report mixed reactions. For some, the presence of orcas is a striking sign of change, animals once rare now appearing with greater frequency. For others, it signals concern for traditional subsistence species. Scientific surveys corroborate anecdotal reports, documenting increased orca sightings correlated with warmer years. The narrative of invulnerability dissolves again here. Orcas adjust movement in response to shifting ice, but the underlying driver is global climate alteration. the same species navigating ecosystem collapse in southern salmon rivers now encounters transformed Arctic seas. Their expansion demonstrates resilience of physiology and social coordination. Yet resilience operates within limits defined by prey, stability, and chemical conditions. Pollutants carried north through atmospheric and oceanic circulation deposit in Arctic waters, entering food chains that orcas now access. Bioaccumulation does not respect latitude. The Arctic shift therefore illustrates both capacity and constraint. Orcas can enter new territories when physical barriers recede. They can apply learned hunting strategies to novel prey. They can navigate complex fjord systems and coordinate in unfamiliar acoustic landscapes. But their success depends on broader ecosystem health. Climate-driven change alters that health unpredictably. The image of orcas slicing through newly ice-free channels may evoke adaptation, yet it also marks a threshold crossed by global systems. Flexibility allows response, imbalance challenges sustainability. The story remains consistent with earlier chapters, strength intertwined with dependence, intelligence operating within ecological parameters, culture guiding adaptation. For all the decades of observation, satellite tracking, drone photogrammetry, biopsy sampling, and acoustic recording, there remains a vast portion of orca life that exists beyond direct human understanding. The image most people carry, coastal pods weaving through fjords, dorsal fins slicing calm inland waters, represents only a fraction of the species' global distribution. Beyond the continental shelves, far from shore-based research stations, offshore populations travel through open ocean systems where observation is intermittent and often accidental. These whales are known primarily from brief encounters, strandings, or distant sightings from fishing vessels. Genetic samples indicate that some offshore groups differ significantly from their coastal counterparts. Their teeth often show extensive wear, suggesting a diet dominated by sharks or other abrasive prey. Acoustic recordings reveal call patterns distinct from resident and transient ecotypes. Yet their full social structures, migratory patterns, and hunting strategies remain only partially documented. In deep pelagic waters, where human presence is sparse, orcas likely engage in behaviors never captured on camera. Satellite tags provide movement data for limited durations, tracing broad routes across ocean basins, but they cannot reveal the fine-scale coordination of hunts hundreds of meters below the surface. Deepwater hunting remains one of the least understood aspects of their ecology. While orcas are capable of diving several hundred meters, much of what they pursue at those depths is inferred rather than directly observed. Cephalopods, deep-sea fish, perhaps even interactions with other large marine mammals. These events occur in darkness where human technology struggles to follow. Underwater drones and remote-operated vehicles offer glimpses, yet battery life, pressure limitations, and field-of-view constraints restrict sustained observation. The ocean, especially beyond coastal zones, remains largely unmapped in behavioral detail. Understudied regions extend beyond the open ocean. Parts of the southern hemisphere, including sections of the Southern Ocean around Antarctica and remote areas of the Indian Ocean, host orca populations that researchers encounter infrequently. Weather conditions, logistical challenges, and funding limitations constrain systematic study. In some regions, orcas are known primarily through anecdotal accounts from fishing communities or isolated expedition reports. These fragments hint at diversity in behavior that may rival or exceed what is documented in well-studied northern populations. Even within regions of intensive research, unexplained synchronized behaviors occasionally surface. There are reports of pods altering course simultaneously without obvious visual or acoustic cues detectable by researchers. Instances where multiple individuals breach in near-perfect sequence suggest coordination beyond simple reaction. While such behavior could be facilitated by subtle body signals or low-amplitude vocalizations outside human hearing thresholds, definitive explanation remains elusive. The limits of our sensory equipment impose boundaries on interpretation. Hydrophones capture a wide frequency range, but they may miss ultra-low frequency signals or context-dependent variations that orcas perceive clearly. Long-distance acoustic possibilities continue to intrigue marine scientists. Sound travels efficiently in water, particularly in layers where temperature and salinity create channels that minimize attenuation. It is conceivable that orcas maintain awareness of other pods across distances far exceeding visual range. How far such communication extends under natural conditions is not fully established. Tagging studies show individuals covering vast distances over months, yet whether coordinated movement occurs across separated groups via acoustic exchange remains speculative. The complexity of ocean acoustics, with its layering, refraction, and interference from anthropogenic noise, complicates modelling of communication range. The technological tools available to marine researchers, while advanced compared to a century ago, remain limited relative to the scale of the environment. Satellite tags detach after weeks or months. Drone flights provide snapshots rather than continuous records. Biopsy samples reveal genetic and contaminant data, but not real-time behavior. Even with long-term photo identification catalogues spanning decades, there are life events, deep water hunts, offshore social gatherings, rare interactions that unfold outside the lens. The ocean's opacity shields as much as it reveals. Offshore populations particularly illustrate the boundary of knowledge. Genetic analyses indicate that some may represent lineages diverging thousands of years ago, shaped by unique ecological pressures. Yet without sustained field presence, their dialects, matrilineal structures, and cultural traditions remain largely undocumented. It is possible that entirely distinct hunting methods exist beyond those already described. Evidence of toothwear suggests dietary specialization, but the full repertoire of offshore strategy is incomplete. Occasional strandings provide data points, stomach contents, age estimation, health metrics, but these represent endpoints rather than living narratives. There are also broader cognitive mysteries. The full extent of orca memory, particularly in relation to long-term environmental shifts, cannot be measured directly. We infer capacity from behavior and longevity, yet internal representation of space, time, and social bonds remains opaque. Neural imaging techniques applicable to terrestrial mammals cannot be deployed easily in large marine mammals. Brain anatomy offers clues, but dynamic processing eludes observation. Even the dialect systems, well documented in certain regions, may contain layers of variation not yet passed. Categorization depends on human classification schemes. Orcas may perceive distinctions and subtleties beyond our analytical frameworks. Machine learning applied to acoustic datasets has begun to uncover patterns previously unnoticed, suggesting that the vocal landscape is richer than early studies indicated. Still, interpretation lags behind detection. The interplay between cultural transmission and genetic divergence remains an active area of research. While evidence supports behavioral isolation shaping gene flow, the temporal dynamics of that process, how rapidly culture can induce reproductive separation, are not fully resolved. Offshore and coastal populations provide case studies, yet comprehensive global mapping of orca ecotypes is incomplete. In remote archipelagos and deep ocean corridors, there may be groups whose traditions have never intersected with human awareness. Climate change introduces additional unknowns. As ocean temperatures shift and ice retreats, new habitats open while others contract. How quickly orcas can adapt culturally to novel prey or altered migration patterns remains uncertain. The Arctic expansion described earlier demonstrates flexibility, but long-term outcomes are unpredictable. Behavioral plasticity interacts with ecological stability in ways not easily modelled. The limits of marine research technology define the frontier of knowledge. Autonomous underwater vehicles extend reach, but cannot yet follow pods continuously at depth. Acoustic arrays capture sound but not always source identity without visual confirmation. Satellite imagery tracks ice and surface movement, but not subsurface coordination. Every methodological advance reveals complexity rather than closure. In acknowledging what remains unknown, the narrative does not revert to mystification. It recognizes that large, mobile marine mammals operating in a three-dimensional environment present observational challenges inherent to their medium, the ocean, conceals without intention. Orcas moving through it carry aspects of their lives beyond our documentation. The cumulative portrait assembled across decades of anatomy, sound, society, culture, hunting, intelligence, ecosystem dependence remains incomplete. Offshore migrations beyond shipping lanes, deep water predation below tag range, acoustic exchanges beyond hydrophone detection, synchronized maneuvers without visible cue. These elements persist at the edge of comprehension. Across all the evidence gathered, acoustic dialects, matrilineal stability, specialized hunting strategies, ecological dependence, adaptability to shifting ice, and even the structural consequences of loss. What emerges is not a mirror of human civilization, but something parallel and fundamentally different. Orcas possess culture without constructing cities. Their traditions persist without architecture. They maintain continuity without written record. In the open ocean, stability does not require monuments. It requires memory carried in living bodies. Culture, as described earlier, shapes diet, movement, and association. In human societies, culture often manifests through material artifacts, buildings, tools, documents. In orca society, culture is transmitted through sound and behavior. A calf does not inherit a library. It inherits a dialect. It does not walk through streets named for ancestors. It swims alongside them. The absence of physical infrastructure does not equate to absence of structure. Social rules exist. Who travels with whom? Who leads during scarcity? Which prey are pursued when silence is required? These rules are maintained not by codified law, but by repetition across generations. Memory without writing defines the continuity of matrilines. A grandmother who has survived decades of fluctuating salmon runs carries ecological data encoded in neural pathways. She does not inscribe maps, yet her movement choices guide descendants effectively. The archive resides in behavior. Human systems externalize memory through books, databases, digital storage. Orcas internalize it. The vulnerability of such a system lies in the mortality of individuals. When a matriarch dies, her experiential knowledge vanishes unless already transmitted. Yet this vulnerability coexists with resilience, because knowledge flows through social proximity continuously rather than episodically. Leadership in orca society lacks formal hierarchy. There are no overt dominance displays comparable to certain primate species, no territorial proclamations. The eldest female often guides travel, but her authority is practical rather than coercive. Leadership emerges from competence recognized through survival advantage. During prey scarcity, the pod follows the individual most likely to locate food. This distributed, context-dependent leadership contrasts with hierarchical systems reliant on formal rank. It functions because kinship bonds align interests. Social continuity without ownership further distinguishes orca life from human civilization. There is no concept of property in the material sense. Pods do not claim fixed territories with boundaries enforced through constant conflict. While home ranges exist, areas frequented seasonally or annually, they overlap with others. Interactions between pods can include avoidance, indifference, or brief contact, but rarely escalate into sustained territorial warfare. Resource competition occurs primarily through ecological dynamics rather than organized intergroup aggression. Stability without expansion characterizes many populations. Orcas do not build empires. They do not seek to increase territory beyond ecological necessity. Their range expansions, such as the Arctic shift, respond to environmental opportunity rather than conquest. Population growth, when it occurs, depends on prey abundance and reproductive success, not strategic annexation. In this sense, they represent a model of persistence rather than expansion. The apex predator role described earlier does not translate into territorial war. Predation focuses on prey species, not on conspecific dominance across large scales. While aggressive encounters between orcas occur occasionally, particularly among different ecotypes or in competitive contexts, these are not equivalent to sustained conflict aimed at eliminating rivals. Genetic divergence between resident and transient populations arises from cultural separation rather than active exclusion through violence. The system operates through differentiation, not domination. Comparative analysis with human civilization highlights contrast without elevating one over the other. Humans externalize intelligence through infrastructure and technology. Orcas internalize intelligence through social cohesion and environmental attunement. Human societies record history to extend memory across millennia. Orca societies extend memory across decades within living lineages. Human expansion often reconfigures ecosystems radically. Orca expansion, when it occurs, integrates into existing trophic structures, though not without consequence. Intelligence in orcas does not culminate in tool-building cities or written language. It culminates in adaptive stability within fluid environments. The capacity to coordinate hunts across shifting ice, to maintain dialect integrity over generations, to navigate changing prey landscapes, and to exhibit restraint toward unfamiliar. Species reflects a cognitive system tuned to ecological complexity rather than symbolic abstraction. Their world is structured by water and sound. Information travels differently there. The absence of written record does not diminish the sophistication of what is retained. It changes the medium. Memory in orca society is embodied and relational. It is accessed through presence, not through consultation of artifacts. The philosophical implication is not that one system is superior, but that intelligence manifests according to context. In terrestrial environments where hands manipulate objects and fire transforms materials, civilization develops architecture. In pelagic environments where mobility and acoustics dominate, civilization, if the term can be used cautiously, manifests as stable matrilines and transmitted hunting traditions. The boundary between culture and biology blurs, as described earlier, because behavior shapes evolutionary trajectory. In orcas, intelligence does not lead to territorial war. It leads to precision in hunting and efficiency in social organization. It does not produce ownership. It produces continuity. It does not construct monuments, it constructs relationships. Observing this pattern across chapters, misunderstood predator, engineered body, acoustic perception, dynastic birth, grandmother leadership, cultural specialization, calculated hunting, measured intelligence, restrained boundary with humans, behavioral response to loss, ecosystem dependence, ecological removal in captivity, Arctic adaptation, enduring unknowns, reveals coherence. The coherence lies not in human-like traits, but in consistency across domains. Each element reinforces the others. Intelligence without civilization, in this framing, represents a form of long-term equilibrium within environmental constraints. Orcas persist not by reshaping the ocean, but by aligning with its rhythms. They adjust when ice retreats. They struggle when salmon collapse. They carry knowledge in elders and transmit it through sound. They demonstrate that complex social systems can exist without architecture or ownership. The comparison is not poetic abstraction. It is grounded in observation of behavior and demographic data. It invites reconsideration of what constitutes sophistication in non-human species. The absence of cities does not imply absence of order. The absence of written language does not imply absence of memory. The absence of territorial war does not imply absence of power. In the vast shifting medium of the ocean, orcas have developed a stable, culturally transmitted, cognitively supported way of life that has endured for millennia.